Jose Conde, welcome to the Cellar Studio at Belfield. It's really, really awesome to have you here. I think, in a way, being in this small little cellar, which is now a studio, kind of reminds me of the day we met when I was sort of bashing around the Franschhoek Bubbly Fest, getting sort of poured lots of bubblies and feeling like I wanted to maybe just get out of that space and go and find a hidden gem in the winelands. It was a friend of mine. We got into the car and we somehow ended up driving up into the Jonkershoek Valley, found a gate, the Stark-Conde. I think it might have said closed.
Probably.
Yeah, probably. And then driving into just outside your cellar. No one was evidently there.
Yeah, that's right. I used to just sit there all day on a Saturday, waiting for someone to show up. Most times they didn't, and if they did, it was usually 30 seconds before closing.
Exactly, that was us. And then, just seeing you sort of, again, trying to find someone, and you were scratching around in the back, doing something, and what a fantastic moment for me, because it's been a long journey that we've walked together.
Yes,
from that small cellar, we're under the influence of Cabernet Sauvignon together today, exploring this amazing grape, and now looking at those interpretations of Cabernet originally from Stark-Condé. There's an addition to that original wines that you made there, and now there's also Leeflands and Man Family Wines. So thank you for letting us into that tasting room on that day, and for the incredible journey.
It's really been it's been fantastic, fantastic for me, and also fantastic to see your own journey in that whole time, and see you guys grow your company, and what a fantastic company it's grown into be. And I'm proud to say that I was there in those early days. Yeah,
it was really fantastic.
I'm glad I opened the door. Sometimes I didn't.
Well, I have to say you seemed a little bit grumpy when we walked in.
Probably. Well, I'm grumpy all the time. Actually, pretty much that's my status quo. So
that's classic. So we'll dive into the wines, because we're basically taking a journey through Cabernet Sauvignon. But I'd love to kind of understand, how did you happen to be in South Africa, in that valley, which is quite famous for Cabernet Sauvignon? What is your journey to up to now? Maybe up to that point, and then we'll dive into the rest.
Well, it's a very long story. I don't know that we have time for the whole story, but if I say it in short, it's a woman. So my wife's father was from Stellenbosch, and after we got married and had children, my wife had asked if I would be interested in moving to South Africa to be closer to her family. And I thought, we had traveled there, a number of times over the years, and I saw what a fantastic country it was, and a lot of passion of the people. And then, of course, I saw Jonkershoek, one of the most beautiful spots on earth.
Yeah.
And so I said, why not? And actually, at the beginning, not really thinking that I would do wine. But I had an early midlife crisis, and I've always really been passionate about craft, passionate about making things, and interested in wine. And when I was there and struck by all these beautiful vineyards that we were surrounded with, I thought, why not get my hands dirty and give it a try. And, I always liked Cabernet. I like drinking Cabernet. We're sitting there in Stellenbosch, really what I would say prime Cabernet country. And the first wine I ever made is actually this one here with the red cap, our Stellenbosch Cabernet. And that's what we started with. I started with Cabernet, and I think, I had a lot of success in those early days with Cabernet, and we just kind of really stuck to it. And all the wines, now we're making a few different wines, but
yes, of course.
Almost the core of every of the different wines we make, we do Cabernet.
And Cabernet Sauvignon is in itself an amazing traveler as a grape. So, I'm taking its hat off to you. You've also traveled and worked and lived all over the world. Do you have any memory of an early Cabernet Sauvignon or Cabernet Sauvignon based blend that you enjoyed? What was sort of, were there any kind of aha moments?
Well, I think that, I was a student studying art in New York City, and, I came from really the sticks. I mean, I came from a place that hardly had any wine, that people drank mainly beer and spirits. It wasn't so fashionable, or there was not even, I don't think, a wine shop in my town at that time. But I loved going in New York and prowling the wine shops.
Yeah.
And fantastic wine shops, and having no understanding at all of what was in a bottle when you saw a bottle of French wine, and what was Bordeaux and what did Burgundy mean. But I liked getting into that and trying things. And I did really enjoy a lot of the Bordeaux's, not even really understanding that was particularly Cabernet. But I would say my first experience was having a bottle of Ridge Montebello, and just kind of really being just blown away, both by, I think the fact that it was an American wine, a Californian wine, but really showed like a lot of like classicism and a lot of greatness. So I think that's a winery and a wine that it's always been a bit of a touchstone for me over the years.
Oh, brilliant. So it's like a reference point.
I think so. And I think it's also this mix, of kind of New World, but with kind of styling from the Old World, as we say. And I think that has a lot to give us as inspiration in South Africa, because I think that's kind of where we sit in terms of style. Yeah.
And going back to the roots of Cabernet Sauvignon, so we always, as South Africans, I think we kind of maybe have a bit of an inferiority complex, and I think that's changing over time. And whatever we do, whether it's business or wine, you're always looking out to the rest of the world. And one of the key anchors for Cabernet is obviously Bordeaux, the left bank of Bordeaux. So that's what you mean by old world style, sort of more the Bordelais wines, more restrained, classic, fine tannin, not necessarily as like big in fruit.
That's right. Yeah.
And then California being kind of more opulent, and
more fruit forward. Yeah, a little bit easier. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely
richer.
It's definitely a theme that's come out in a few conversations I've had, where South African wines, I don't necessarily think this was the case until maybe 10, 15 years ago, depending on the region and the winery. But more and more, it's becoming this incredible combination of those New World fruits. We've got the sort of African sun. We've got these incredibly ancient soils, and you're getting the New World fruit. But then you also, a lot of the winemakers, I think, have been influenced by perhaps less sort of flashy, Parkerized type wine and making styles.
I think that's true. And actually, I had a sommelier from Switzerland that came and visited a few months back. And when he came, we had this conversation, and he said he was been blown away by his first time coming to South Africa, and has been blown away by the wines.
Yeah.
And he said, well, South Africa is the only country making old world wines now. Because he said, actually, in Europe, he says he finds that most of the wines has really chased this very like New World, just pure fruit kind of profile, and they've kind of lost the plot, in his opinion, about their food friendliness. And I think it is true. I think it comes down to something like if you South Africa has got this really great hospitality culture. They love welcoming people. The braai, everybody stands around the braai and drinks. Wine is really about mixing with food and mixing with people, and I think they really understand that really well in South Africa. And so I think that's one reason why I think we've hit that style quite well, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think when you talk about Cabernet, even though we do have this kind of paradigm of Bordeaux, and then we have California, but I don't think that South Africa is third by any means. I think it's one of the great places to make wine. I think it's one of the great places to make Cabernet, particularly. And I don't think we need to bow our heads to anybody.
No, I agree completely. It's just, I think it's interesting, having grown up in South Africa, we're always so, attracted to, what's going on in other parts of the world. And it's not necessarily related to wine, but then you actually realize that we've got huge amounts of, kind of intellectual property and the way we do things. And, it's that old saying now that's become like part of the Springboks, hulle weet nie wat ons weet nie, they don't know what we know.
Yeah.
So Is there one? So Stark-Conde is like the origin story of your journey in wine, and yeah, just the most incredible. I think I always talk about how I learn about wine mostly through engaging with winemakers and visiting places and people. And I learned a lot about aspect, altitude, and kind of how unique the Jonkershoek Valley is, also in terms of how it catches rain, and you've got that like higher rainfall and higher altitude than the rest of the Stellenbosch Valley. We're going to get into that when I think we taste the wine, because in a way we're kind of doing it back to front. Where did the journey of Man Family Wines start in relation to when you were getting things going at Stark-Conde? Because what we're going to be doing is in a way tasting different Cabernets now from different winemaking approaches, but also different regions.
Right. We're I think tasting different regions, and we're also looking at also different price points.
Yes, of course.
There's different kinds of wines. I often talk about, like, you have the wine, you have your daily wine, you have maybe the once a week wine, and then you have the wine that you want to drink. I always say it's the wine you want to drink the first night you meet the woman that you want to marry, kind of. Those special, for those really special occasions. And there are a few maybe in between that, but I think there's, sometimes it has to do with pricing and things like that. But we look at it different, in different ways, and whatever we do, we try to make, good quality.
Of course.
Yeah, and expressive Cabernet.
So was Man Family Wines, did it almost come from a request from a customer?
It did. I had actually several customers request. I started selling my Stark-Condé wines, and a few of my customers approached me just about the same time. So it was a bit of a coincidence, and they said, we're really looking for a little bit kind of, let's call it better value, South African wine that that will work with a wider range of customers. Obviously, less expensive. And they said we kind of struggled with that, because they'd either find the wine that was right and the packaging wouldn't be right, or they'd find the packaging quite right but the wine's not very good, or the quality control not right. They struggled a bit with that, and some of them asked me if I could help them with introductions. And I also started looking around and seeing what was happening in that sort of space. And one day a friend of mine approached me, a winemaking friend approached me, and he said, I have about 600 cases of Pinotage that doesn't really have a home. Do you think we could do something with that? And I said, yeah, why not? I think I have a client who'll look at it. And we started with that. So the first wine.
Wow. So it started that small volume, eh?
Yeah, it was quite small.
Yeah.
But within 6 months they had ordered again, and then within a year they were ordering more, and we had already sold it to a few customers, so it had grown.
Brilliant.
And the second wine that we did was Cabernet. And that started growing actually fairly quickly. I think within about 2 years we were doing about 15,000 cases, and we needed something to call it. So we said we're tossing around different names. Unfortunately, our names really didn't work really well, so we decided to call it Man, after our wives' initial, Marie, Annette, and Nikki.
Good way to convince sort of, I suppose, like winemakers' wives, a little bit like army wives. They're like, oh gosh, where are we going? What do we do?
Yeah, they do. They have to have a lot of patience, especially in harvest. But,
yeah, brilliant. Yeah. So we've got the Man Family Cab in our left glass here. What do you look for in Cabernet? Like, if you're just looking, because in a way it's a brand by itself, because it's got quite a distinctive flavor, tannin profile. But what is your kind of, if you've got the winemaking team preparing Cabernet Sauvignon samples, what are you looking for in a Cabernet?
Well, I think you'll get, when we talk about fruit, you usually get this fruit spectrum. We often talk about it between red and black fruits.
Yes. And
that depends a little bit on year, although it also depends on the area where it might be picked.
Yeah.
But we look for something in that spectrum. Okay. And we have this, on winemakers, they talk about sometimes fancy fruits that we actually don't eat that often, but maybe like in a red currant to black currant.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we want this purity of fruit. Yeah. That's really it. I think it's more than that. Like, different years we might get a different expression, but we want something that has a lot of purity,
Yeah.
that is clean and bright. Yeah, that's what it should be, first of all.
And then sometimes it's also about what you don't want. So Cabernet Sauvignon, because of its kind of parents being Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc, you can sometimes get that greenness that you maybe aren't looking for.
That's right. Yeah, you always have to be a little bit, wary of a bit of greenness in it. Although, me personally, I'm not part of the green police. There are a lot of people that, it has a hint of that. But when I was first starting making Cabernet, I look back on a lot of textbooks and a lot of old writing about wine, and you'll find all the great Cabernets almost always in the older descriptions will talk about a little bit of herbal mint. It is a small element of greenness is inherent in Cabernet. So I don't think you have to be panic about it if it's got a touch of it. It shouldn't be overwhelming. It shouldn't be dominant, but it's not a problem if it has a little touch of it.
Yeah.
And we find is that over the years, it's very often those that have just a touch of that often have the best aging potential.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that. I think being in Elgin, we're quite sensitive here with
Elgin sometimes you have to be extremely careful because it can get away from you. But
the bunch zone around the Cabernet looks pretty bare from pretty early on.
Yeah.
So,
but we want that purity.
Yeah.
It should. A Cabernet is never really a small wine, so it should. We always talk about Cabernet's got all of its potential when it's young, and then it calms down and gets more integrated and balanced as it ages. But usually, a young Cabernet's got a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah. So
and then
keep going.
Yeah. So I think the other thing about Cabernet is that. I think almost more than any other wine, what we know as kind of modern Cabernet is really a marriage of oak and wine.
Okay.
So oak does play a fairly large, important role as in the style.
Yes.
It could play a lesser or a greater role depending on what you want to achieve as winemaking. But I think framing that fruit with just a touch of oak.
And it has a great affinity for oak.
Yeah, it has a great affinity. Yeah. It works really well. It actually brings out the flavors.
Yeah.
And if you look here, we're not putting a lot of oak in this wine.
Yeah.
But it does have about 50% of it has gone into oak barrels. And of that, about 10% of that will be new. So in the final wine, that's about 5%, right? But so it's just a little touch of it. That really frames that Cabernet fruit.
Beautiful. Well, let's have a little taste together. Yeah, I think a lot of when you talk about wine, it's often very much around flavor, but that's what I love about Cabernet Sauvignon is just to think about the texture as well, and texture in wine. It's obviously tannin. But then there's also kind of like fruit kind of sweetness that you get, which I love in Cabernet Sauvignon. It's not sugar sweetness, it's just that lovely fruit. And then when I think of great Cabernet Sauvignon, I think of like fine tannins, not big chunky tannins. And this is incredible. That's what I just love about these wines, of the Mann family wines. I mean, that really over delivers, and it's got probably more of a red fruit profile than maybe some of your Stark-Conde wines, but that's actually also very attractive.
No, it's definitely showing more red fruits here, and I think you're right on the tannin. Tannin is a big part of Cabernet. Cabernet is one of the grapes with the most amount of tannin.
Yeah,
and when we talk about winemaking, it's really what we work on a lot, getting that balance right. But you want to get that little fine tannin, and I think this has got a little nice expression of fine tannin. That's the one thing I think about South African Cabernets in general is that they have a bit of tannin.
Yeah.
That makes it this nice dry finish, and it actually what makes them so food friendly.
Yeah, we don't struggle with that, I think, in terms of getting that. And this particular wine, most of the fruits coming from the Achterpaal, Voorpaardenberg kind of area?
Yes, yeah. It will be, in our business today, we have 30 growers that are partners in our business.
Wow.
And we source most of the fruit from them. We'll buy in a little bit, from Stellenbosch to balance it. but most of it will be from the Octoparl area. And it's an area that's not maybe traditionally known as being a Cab area, but actually when you have good vineyards and they're nice and healthy, it actually, you can get some very good quality fruit from that area.
I think that whole area is like was a little bit of a hidden kind of card that was used in the sort of former Distel kind of days. There was a lot of growers, and a lot of our customers across Africa, there's a very strong focus on community and building partnerships with your community, especially in conservation areas. Not having this like fenced approach, which quite a few areas in South Africa have. Is a lot more open, and you actually have like villages within conservation areas. So what I love this about the Mann Family Wines business, where you actually have growers, not just hammering them down, buying grapes, leaving, maybe next year we'll buy grapes from you. You've actually created a more of a partnership structure, and that creates a lot more longevity in these grape growing kind of businesses, because it's a tricky business.
Yes, I think. Well, I would like to say that I was really, really clever, but I don't know about that. I think that's a bit of the luck that you have. But we were introduced to these growers very early on, and we decided to give them a share in the business. And it's been a good partnership, and I think that's just it. We wanted consistency of supply, and that provided that.
Yeah.
And it's been one of the keys to our success, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, so now, so Stark-Condé, Mann Family Wines, that was the sort of origin story. We moving on to another midlife crisis of yours.
Which maybe the biggest.
maybe the biggest, which is Leeflands, which, if you think of sort of royalty of Cabernet region, this is sitting in the heartland, Canon-Corp Warwick kind of part of the world. And Leeflands as a farm, I think it's obviously got a long history. It had gone into sort of a phase of not really being active as a wine farm, lots of old vines. How on earth did this come about? And take us, as we taste the wine, maybe like just talk a little bit about that journey. You could have bought a few Porsches by now, or open top Ferraris.
Yeah, this is my Porsche, Ferrari, and Lamborghini, all rolled in one, I guess. Well, actually, our Mann business had grown quite a bit over the years, and we started looking for a home for it, because we were renting space for quite a few years in an industrial area, and it wasn't a great place to work. And I
remember collecting wine there a few times. Yeah.
I think every time I would go there, because I would be at my office at the Stark-Conde, and I would drive over there, and I'd feel a little bit sorry
with your waterfalls and your koi fish and your
and we started looking for a place that we could have an office and a warehouse, and we started looking around at different properties, and this Leefland was always in the back of our mind, because we'd drive by, and we were very familiar with the property. When I first moved to South Africa, it was considered one of the top estates in the country. Actually, it was normally referred to as being in the top 5. Very well known, but it had gotten, as you mentioned, quite run down. And we had looked probably, I think over the course of about 2 or 3 years, we had looked at 50, 60 properties around Stellenbosch and Parle area. And one day, after visiting in a couple of properties, we drove by, and my business partner Turl and myself, we commented how the vineyards were looking pretty miserable, and what a shame it was.
Yeah.
And we said, let's just go in there and ask them, see what's going on, and maybe they'd be interested in selling. And it was time for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was, we're very happy about the decision. It's a great property. It's quite a, it's a long-term project to redevelop vineyards, and that we're talking about really 20 years, and we're now in the 5th year of it right now. So I think that we made a lot of nice changes. The tasting room is now open. We have a restaurant that opened up about 6 months ago. So yeah, we're what we say, we're running a marathon, and I'm still in the first like quarter of it, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do enjoy that side of the wine business. Wine companies are, I think, in their nature, some of the oldest businesses on earth. You've probably got some of the Italian
Yes.
families, like 600-year-old businesses, and you kind of understand why, because you plant a vineyard, 5-6 years later, you can start getting an idea of how it's going. Then it maybe changes completely if it goes through a different phase and starts maturing. And so that experiment, if you decide to take the vineyard out, it's like 8 years later.
Yes, yeah.
So it's a lot of work. So it's just explain where's Leeflands. So Stark-Condé in the Jonkershoek Valley, which is pretty much in Stellenbosch. You drive up the Jonkershoek Valley. Your vineyards in Stark-Condé, we'll talk more, but like kind of a little bit more west and south aspects to them, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And then Leefland
is it's located on the Simonsberg, so I think they refer to it as the Golden Mile there in Simonsberg. So it's aligned with a lot of very good, very well-known estates. We're right next to Cabernet, of course, which is one of the best-known South African estates. Across the road is Warwick and Le Bonheur, two other well-known Stellenbosch estates. So it's in a great, absolutely fantastic area. It's a little bit warmer than where we are in Jonkershoek. Definitely like red wine country. If you look at the neighbors, I mean, these are all people who are making kind of big, serious red wines. And so that'll certainly be a part of our future.
Amazing. So let's give it a little taste. So immediately that darker fruit profile for me comes through.
So we're still working. This is not 100% estate.
Yes.
Yeah. It'll be a few years before it is. So it is from our vineyards and neighbors, and with a little bit of octopal fruit thrown in. But you're right, a little bit darker fruited profile.
I love the flavor profile of this is so interesting to me, because it's kind of like that umami kind of texture to it. It's got that fruit, but it's like a little bit of that savory element, probably from the oak. Really fine tannins. That is delicious.
Yeah. So this will be 100% barrel matured.
Yeah.
Although the oak, we also try to get a nice balance in the oak. So very classic kind of, about 20% new. 25% new with a balanced second, third, fourth, so that what that means is that we want to have not really a dominant, overpowering impression of oak on the wine, but just have that frame the fruit. Also, this is made in a rather kind of old school Stellenbosch way, which is using a bit of Cinsault as a blending component.
Fantastic.
And that also helps kind of balance the tannin in the wine, add a little bright fruit element to it. And we know those old Stellenbosch Cabernets that had a little touch of Cinsault, they've all, many of them have aged really magnificently, and they're kind of like legends. So it's, we're not the only ones, but it's, people are looking at that method of blending and getting inspiration from it.
It's kind of a, you could probably have a debate on what is the true Cape blend. It's probably, if you look at it from a heritage perspective, it's probably something with Cabernet and Cinsault,
Yeah, definitely. That's be a strong argument for that.
Yeah, and then the winemaking, because I know like your neighbors, Kononkop, they're kind of using some of those traditional concrete fermenters. There's stainless steel fermentation. There's when I first met you at Stark-Conde, it was very much like those small bins with punch down. What kind of techniques are you using with Leeflands, maybe in comparison to Man and Stark-Conde?
Well, the winemaking's pretty classic. So most of the fruit will come in and be distemmed and then put into stainless steel tanks and then pumped over.
Okay.
But
it's a lovely way to get that extraction out of it.
It works very well with Cabernet. I mean, we'll talk about Stark-Condé, but we've done a lot of different experiments over the years at Stark-Condé, and there's pluses and minuses to each of them, but in terms of those are more almost operational differences in them for Cabernet. But we find doing it in tank works very well.
Yeah,
it gives you a lot of tools.
It is interesting for us as well on the farm here, because we made wine with that technique, pump over, and then we moved into the cellar the next year. And I think the difference, it was sort of a softer extraction that we got from that pump over versus this sort of giant potato masher that's coming in every sort of 6 to 8 hours.
I'm a big fan of punch downs.
Yeah.
We do a lot of punch downs at Stark-Condé, and we experiment also with it at Leeflands also. But I think with Cabernet, when you look at Cabernet, I think it works very well to do it in the tank. It gives you a lot of options in terms of your extraction.
Yes.
How much you want to do, how you want to back off on it. You want to give them more air, less air. You have a lot of tools in the fermentation process to help manage the extraction. So it actually takes a little bit more skill, I think.
Yes.
The good thing about punch down is that almost anybody can do it.
Yes.
So it's very forgiving. But yeah, when you do it in a tank, yeah, you have you need to know what you're doing, but you have a lot of options.
And when it comes to some of those options, I mean, is some of them just to kind of remove some of the juice from that tank to get more like skinned juice fresh? Like, what? There are lots of
I think
tools.
For instance, we'll bring it in because you have it in tank. You have a lot of options for cooling. So we'd generally bring it in and cool it down, give it a little bit of a cold soak, and to extract. You get extraction, without alcohol, and let it do that for a couple days before the fermentation initiates. And then once it starts, actually you can control the temperature really well, quite precisely. So we like a nice cooler ferment, and let it go as long as possible. And then also we'll adjust too. We're always looking at tannin, so tannin is really like one of the keys. Everybody refers back to it because Cabernet can have so much tannin.
Yes.
And depending on the years, especially we've had a few drought years as well. 22 wasn't a drought year, but we've had some drier years where you had to manage the tannin very carefully. So you can really choose to back off, especially at the end of fermentation on the extraction. We like to do that, even pressing it early and finishing it off without the skins, to minimize the tannin.
It's fascinating. I could talk about this stuff all day because it's a lot of it that must come from trial and error.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, you see what works, and then you stick with it, and you fine tune it a little bit every year. So it's constant experimentation, but we try to find kind of a style that works, and then tweak that as time goes. Yeah,
and then I mean, even though it's a single varietal, you're still blending batches of Cabernet Sauvignon, so you're learning from each particular batch, each vineyard.
Yeah, each vineyard. And we track the clones actually within the vineyard and the rootstocks as well. So, And
then the different coopers, the different oak, the different ages.
There's
Well, I remember that's the funny thing when you start a small. I mean, I remember making wine with my dad, just 2 barrels, and it's like, that's your sample size, and then next year it doubles, and then it keeps doubling.
And there are so many factors in it.
Yeah.
But in the end of the day, one thing that I've seen over all the years is that good vineyards always show their true colors.
Yeah, 100%. Brilliant. Okay, so let's come back to where it all started. We'll just dispose of this and get into Stark-Condé. So I'm going to pour the Stellenbosch cab in the left glass. And then we'll do 3 pints in the right. It's always a nice sound. Yeah, let me do this.
Okay, this wine's got a little bit of a special place in my heart because it was the first wine that we made.
Yeah.
It's always been kind of almost the cornerstone of the winery. It represents about 40 to 50% of our production. Yeah.
And so just kind of for those those listeners or viewers who haven't visited Stellenbosch, can you explain that valley and what makes it special, and in your particular pocket as well?
Yeah, I think it really is a special place. I think that probably if you ask any winemaker, they're going to tell you they love where they make wine, they love their vineyards. I think that's part of it. But I think in wine, we usually talk about what makes a vineyard special or unique. And I think when you go into Jonkershoek, you can see that even within like the context of the Cape or of Stellenbosch, that Jonkershoek Valley is quite unique.
Yes.
It's this very, very narrow valley that you drive up into. At the end of the valley is a national park, the Jonkershoek Nature Reserve. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it has like pristine fynbos.
Yeah.
And we are the last farm up against that. In fact, there's not many farms in Jonkershoek. I think there is 6 that are growing grapes.
Yes.
And just a couple that are making wine under a Jonkershoek appellation.
Wow.
If we call that, yeah. And in fact, the appellation of, in South Africa we call it the ward, the origin, was actually made for our farm. Because it was the only really estate in that whole valley.
Yes.
And it is, because of the way the valley is, it creates a rain cloud effect. So it has about double Stellenbosch average rainfall, but mainly in the wintertime. So our summer, it traps it in there. Very often, it's quite funny. We'll be sitting on the farm and it'll be cloudy and rainy, and you drive into Stellenbosch and it'll be clear. So historically, we'll get 1,200 millimeters of rain a year, so that is about double of Stellenbosch average.
Yeah.
Because of that rain, you get a different kind of formation of tannin when the grapes are forming. So it's always been known for having a very fine, elegant tannin.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a cool site. We have higher elevation vineyards, so our vineyards go from about 180 meters above sea level up to almost 600.
Wow.
With some of the highest, Cabernet vineyards in Stellenbosch.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is, in Elgin, you always think, it's cool climate, high altitude, but that's 200 meters higher than where we are now, because we're down in the valley.
Yeah, people are often surprised, but anyway, when you go there, it is a very special spot. It's really, it's very beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. It's a beautiful spot, but I think also makes beautiful wines.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the climate is definitely one element, but then one thing when I went there and we were chatting, it's also the aspect. You got quite steep slopes. They've got different aspects, which I think you probably you get the last sunlight of the day in certain times of the year, but you certainly in the shadow in the mornings until much later. So it also has an impact.
Yes, it's not because of the way the mountain also reflects the sun, though. It's not totally in the shadow, although it doesn't get direct sunlight until about 10 o'clock in the morning during season. But it still has a fair amount of light. So if you look at it, and I don't want to bore people with too much technicality, but Cabernet, what we find is, or what I believe, right, is that Stellenbosch will be on the warmer side, but the best areas are the cooler areas, but with more sunlight.
Gotcha.
Right? If you can understand that.
Gotcha.
Right? So when you get into cooler, I think you get a little bit longer hang time.
Phenolic
a little bit better phenolic ripeness. But what you want is a spot there that has good sunlight.
Yeah.
Because ultimately sunlight is really the energy that allows the plant to ripen the grapes. And so we have a very nice abundance of vineyards that have very good aspects to the setting sun, and we have long daylight hours. So you can almost see, it's very funny, if you look at a map of the sunlight, of the daylight hours on a vineyard, and you correlate that to what we see as being the quality vineyards, it's almost a perfect correlation of that. So that's an important part.
Yeah, really important part.
Yeah.
And these two wines, so So it started with the Stark-Conde Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon, which is Cabernet Sauvignon blocks, obviously on the farm, but then you also and you can't quite see the vineyard from the cellar. I remember you took us up in your bakkie very kindly, but you just look up right at the top of the ridge. Are those 3 pines? Or maybe it's 2 pines now after one of the fires.
Well, it's a little bit of 2.5. There are 3.
Making a comeback. How would you characterize the difference between these 2 wines, the different approaches?
The winemaking is not so different.
Yeah.
But let me talk about it a little bit backwards. Because, so the 3 Pines, which is one of the best known wines that we make, there's a lookout on the farm of these 3 pine trees. And the vineyard is actually underneath that lookout. And it's a bench of decomposed granite soil, which is very finely textured. It almost has almost like a coarse sand texture with a fairly high clay content. And this vineyard there has always made, from the very, very first days, has always made a very unique, flavorful, characteristic wine. And the first year we made this, I think the vines were only about 7 years old, and it, took the Platter 5-star and trophy for top Cabernet in South Africa. And it's a little bit of a different style of Cabernet. It's not the most traditional. So when you talk about fruit character, we think of Cabernet of being this cassis, this red currant, black currant flavor in Cabernet, where 3 Pines tends to be a little bit like black cherry and even a chocolate note, even before it goes into oak, because we often associate chocolate with coming from
secondary
oak.
flavors. Yeah,
but it often has that. It's a little bit richer in style and a little bit more tannin, but it has this very, very fine tannin. So it's a very pretty wine. We often talk about like a fist in a velvet glove sort of story.
Yes. Yeah, I think this is also such a great representation of how, all great wines have the same thing in common. They have an address. And you're tasting a place, you're tasting the impact of aspects, soil, the climatic influences, and then those wines typically, from what I've seen, are wines where the winemaker's trying to do as little as possible to not mess up this expression of fruits and tannin, and obviously there's an intervention in the cellar, but it's not necessarily like an intervention with maybe other wines. It's very much just trying to showcase.
Yeah, well, in fact, that takes me back to my really early days, first starting out. And you talked about coming in with my little small plastic tanks. And in fact, when I first started, I really didn't know almost anything about making wine. I actually wanted to apprentice in a cellars, and I went around Stellenbosch looking for a position, and I struggled to find one. So I just said, well, damn it, I'm going to just try it myself and give it a go. I picked up, some different textbooks and, started doing self-studying.
Yeah.
And I ordered some equipment, actually, at those days, out of a catalog, and it came from had to come from France, and really not knowing very much about it, but somebody gave me some very good advice. It was David Trafford from Trafford Wines, and we know he's a really great winemaker, and over the years he's become a very good friend. But he told me, he says, keep it simple and get good fruit. And it's advice that I've generally almost 100% followed, and the few times maybe I haven't followed that, I've regretted it. But there's really truth in that. So we keep things quite simple in our cellar. We try to pick the best fruit. We try to make a very nice selection in the vineyard. We bring it in. We handle things very naturally. We didn't talk about it, but today we're fully organic.
Yes.
Some of these are still in conversion, but these were all farmed organically. Everything is natural yeast, so we haven't added anything to it. And we still do a lot in small lots. If you come into our cellar, we have today fancy stainless steel tanks, but I do like open fermenters and hand punch down, because you can feel it.
Yeah.
You can see it, you can feel it, you can smell it.
Yeah.
So it's very easy, and you can get really personal with those fermentations.
Yeah.
And we will have more than 150 ferments during a season of Cabernet. You know, it's almost crazy. The whole place is filled with these small little tanks of individual batches, because we'll pick everything really separate.
Yes.
And we'll keep track of that, right, from the vineyard all the way through into barrel aging.
Wow. I mean, that attention to detail is incredible. And that's definitely the sense I got when I first visited you. So it's great to see that it's continued. Although I have noticed one or two little innovative concrete eggs and things like that. So obviously you've had a few winemakers along the way that have convinced you to.
Yeah, well, you still have to, you have to, you have to try new things. You have to see what works. And we're making a few changes this year also. Looking at the future and where wine's going.
Yes.
So we'll see. But, I think you take things little by little, and, we find that, generally the traditional approach is the best approach.
Yeah. So, these two wines for me, just iconic Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon, and then, this is a wine that I've, followed for a long time, and this is sort of a wine within a wine, because it's that specific site and what that does, at the end of the day in the glass. Beautiful. Yeah. Well done.
Yeah, thank you.
Great stuff.
Well, when you get back then to the Stellenbosch Cabernet, we call it Stellenbosch because when I first started, actually, a lot of our vineyards were under contract to other wineries. So I had to buy in from neighbors for a while until those contracts came up and could just use my own fruit. So today everything is fully organic, fully estate, but we still refer to the wine as being the Stellenbosch Cabernet, even though it's Jonkershoek origin. So this is a blend of our 5 Cabernet vineyards, and then with 3 other Bordeaux blending varieties. So Petit Verdot, which we find works really well in our conditions, Malbec, and Cabernet Franc.
Stunning.
But it's meant to be a little bit softer, younger.
Yeah.
But it's still, a serious age-worthy Cabernet, but it's meant to be more in what we call this kind of Stellenbosch style, which I think of being, really generous, red fruit. And,
accessible, younger, but still with great aging potential.
Yes.
Brilliant.
You can see I think it's got a lot of freshness and,
Great. Okay, super. Let me just, let's jump into the Odin Nectar. This wasn't a wine that you were making when I first met you.
No, the Odin Nectar has been a really a long project. A project that started in 2003. It was the highest elevation site on our farm. So the name itself, Odin Nectar, is from the traditional name of our property.
Yes.
And we had this incredible site at the very top. When I first moved out there, there were pine trees on it, and we took out the pine trees, which are alien to our area, and started rehabilitating the land, and
which takes time.
And then we looked at the potential for vineyards, because I always thought it would have great potential because it was absolutely a fantastic site. And actually, the viticulture consultants actually all kind of said, don't bother with this. This is too marginal at the time. But I was just in love with the site. You would go up there. It was just absolutely like...
Great wines of the world are usually in marginal sites.
Yes,
yeah.
So we planted it. We planted it in 2000 and end of 2003. And we made wine in 2008 from it, and then it burned down in 2009. And then I replanted it now. So
this is above...
This is above the 3 pine trees. Yeah. It sits at about 550 meters above sea level. And the thing about it is it's higher, so it's cooler, and it makes almost a lighter Cabernet when you compare it to the 3 pines, which is darker and richer.
Yeah.
But it's lighter but more intense.
Yeah.
With more intensity of aroma, of flavor, and of tannin as well. So
which is that's kind of, for me, the old world. What some of the old world Bordeaux's get right is that it's truly that, iron fist and a velvet glove. It's got so much subtlety and very restrained, but also huge length on the palate, so much complexity, lovely tannin. Wow.
In 2019, it's a tricky year.
Yes.
End of our drought. Not so hot, but a very dry year.
Yeah.
With the smallest berries that we've ever had, with a very, very low juice return on it. So it made quite intense wines. They've got a lot of guts, a lot of acid and tannin. So they need time.
There was a lot of rain as well during the harvest season. Wasn't that 2019? That was the first year I managed a harvest here, and it was an absolute disaster.
Yeah, I don't really remember a lot of
that
rain.
was an Elden problem.
Also, these days I forget. Sometimes I try to forget the vintages. But,
yes.
We're always watching the windows of rain at the end of the season when we pick Cabernet. But no, we think we really like the wines. But I think they are actually, quite a lot of tannin for the vintage.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I think I just encourage anyone that's listening to this, watching this, just to visit Stark-Conde, because you get a sense of, you've also got what I love is you've got these different parts of the farm that are very representative of what that terroir shows. So the field blend is in the floodplain, effectively, of the river, and that's where obviously lots of crops and what livestock might have been over the centuries, and that's where you've got your vineyard that is designed to manage vigor.
Yes.
and have multiple varietals, and it's effectively that classic field blend. And then as you go up the slopes, it's almost like the different soil types, as you get higher, the climatic influences create this different weight to each wine, weight and texture, but they all have that underlying Cabernet Sauvignon character and a lot of depth to them. It's really fascinating.
That's the one thing about about South Africa generally, particularly in Stellenbosch, is that the farm. So we have 40 hectares of vineyards, but actually it's so diverse within that 40 hectares. It's hard to do one thing. So we do a few different wines, even though our main thing is Cabernet. We call ourselves a Cabernet producer first. But we do have a few other wines, and we are developing a few spots that are just, that maybe don't work with Cabernet, but can, do something else really, really incredibly, like Chenin, that we've got a long-term project to develop a really prime Chenin.
Brilliant. Yeah. Super exciting. And then, Jose, I'd just like to end off, because this buzzword, which I think is incredibly important to talk about, organic.
Yes.
And sustainability, organic. And I think it's something that people talk about a lot, but don't necessarily have an understanding. And I include myself in that framework. So maybe if you can just explain your journey to converting to organic, why you did it, and what have you seen in this grand experiment in the wines themselves. What outcomes or impact has this process had, apart from paying someone to be certified?
Well, I paid a lot of school fees.
Yes.
Let me tell you. Well, I think that it's something that I've been interested in many years, actually, even before I got into the wine industry. Even as a kid, I would try to grow things in our backyard, often with very little success. But I was kind of an outdoor kid. We had fields at the end of our little housing subdivision when I would play and get in the water. We had old creeks with fish and crayfish, crawdads as we call them where I grew up. And I spent a lot of time outdoors, and I was really passionate about outdoors and science and things growing up. And when I came into wine, I was always also interested in this idea of organics. And there was a lot of, when I would talk to people about it, there was a lot of resistance to it. Yeah. And in fact, we looked in the early days, we kind of experimented around with it. maybe trying, but there wasn't really a lot of buy-in by the team. And I'll say is that my business partner in Man, Terrell Myberg, he started farming organically, and he was one of the early ones in the Cape to do it. And he had a lot of experience with it, and he showed that you could actually do it and have success with it. And there are a few other guys in the industry doing it as well. Although South Africa generally tends to be behind a little bit behind the curve when it comes to organic viticulture. But after where Stark-Condé is, because it's in such a beautiful natural area, it just seemed like, let's just say, a natural a natural thing to do. So it was always like in our mind to do it. And we had talked to our team about it several times over the years about it. And then one day, my viticulturist came to me and he said, "You know what, let's do it." And I said, "Okay, but if we're going to do it, I'm going to be the general that we're going to burn the bridges behind us so that we have no option to retreat."
So there's no extra can of Roundup.
We're not gonna. We're gonna make it work.
We're landing here and we are making it work. Yeah.
And I'll give a credit to my team who's done it, because look, they're out there, really looking after it and having to do the hard work. And sometimes they wake me up at 4:00 in the morning when they need to get a spray in. They've grabbed that challenge and done a really good job at it, I think. Look, the actual idea of organics is really, I think, changing and really evolving a lot now.
Okay.
I think at the beginning we used to think of it as just don't use anything that will do harm.
Yes.
To the environment. That was almost it.
But still spray stuff.
You have to spray.
Yeah.
We still have issues with, fungicide.
Yes.
I mean, with fungus disease fungal disease that you have to control. So you have to spray something, right? But organic,
yes.
Right? But now we really look at it a little bit differently. We really look at it as soil health and really examining how does that actual soil look. It's not dirt. It's actually soil.
It's living.
And it should have a living thing. It should have, microorganisms going on there. And that's really what we're spending most of our time doing, studying that soil. We've changed our compost systems so that we can build up microorganisms in the soil, particularly the ratio of fungi in the soil, because a vine needs fungal-dominated soil when you compare fungus to bacteria. So that's where we're spending a lot of our time, and it's really kind of the new frontier. A lot's happened in the last year, but it's exciting, actually. It's very exciting.
It's an interesting thing because it mirrors what's also happening in medicine in terms of how a lot of medicine's going back to your gut biome and to this micro sort of landscape of creatures living within soil, living within our bodies, and how to make sure that we are encouraging the good stuff, that's going on there.
The more we learn, the more we realize how little we actually know.
Totally.
So it's quite interesting. You come back to the wine, that's a more complicated one. I think we made good wines before. I think we're getting better, getting more skilled at it. But I would like to believe that it makes for better wines, more expressive wines. I do think we are just now releasing our first fully organic. Every wine in our lineup is going to be organic.
Amazing.
From September 1. And I do think it is one of the best lineups of wines we've ever made.
That's incredible.
So I'm very excited about it. And when I look what's in the barrel, I'm even more excited. And when I look what's out in the vineyards, I get even more excited.
Well done. And do you think it has any impact on vintage variability, in terms of like being more in tune with just what nature's throwing at you? You can't go and blast a vineyard with like what you might have done in the past or what other farmers are doing.
Well, we've seen one thing is that a lot of people had said, you're taking a massive risk. You have a huge chance of losing your crop. And what we've seen is that actually in many years we have done actually better than a lot of like conventionally farmed vineyards when you talk about in terms of, you know,
yield.
well, not yield, that's a different thing, but in terms of, you know, sickness, you know, from, you know, botrytis or, you know, downy mildew or powdery mildew. So it's one thing, a testament to the team, because you have to be really a lot more attuned to what's going on there in the vineyard. But I think it also shows you build natural resistance up to things, you know. So, yeah, I think we believe that it'll make for a vine that can handle things like drought a lot better. And that's partially, you know, this whole turn to increasing the fungi in the soil, which we know can hold a lot more water and can help really with the water retention in the soil. So it should make it more hardy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, investing back. This is amazing. I feel like it's a review of the end of the beginning of our journey together. And yeah, I just want to thank you for taking the time and coming and going through the Cabernet Sauvignons in your lineup, and talking about the different elements of the grape and your approach to it, and from a winemaking perspective, from a terroir perspective. Yeah, so cheers to you, and yeah, here's to many more glasses shared.
Cheers to Under the Influence and the great work that you're doing. And it's been a nice journey, and to the rest of it.
Yeah, to the rest of it, exactly. Thank you.